Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the weekly webinar number 3. I am Aegon Turplin with the Governor's Office of Planning Research and Strategic Growth Council. I'm very pleased to be on this GO-Biz webinar on this Thursday morning. Today, we're going to be talking about an inclusive approach to recovery during and after COVID-19. And we have a number of incredible partners here to join us today. I'm going to start with just a quick overview of some of our thinking and approach to regional economic development in California, building on the efforts we started last year on Regions Rise Together, and then turn over to my colleague Trayland at GO-Biz to set up the other speakers that are joining us today. So again, thank you for being here, and we're gonna roll through this. We have a lot of great material to cover over this next hour. Regions Rise Together is really become a framework for thinking around regional economic development across California for this administration. And as we enter the current economic challenges and think towards the recovery, it's really a vision for how do we think about high road economic development and high road economic recovery. And a lot of the folks you're going to hear from today are very much involved in that work on a regional scale. And what this begins with is a notion clearly that California has been growing. The growth is challenged and changing and different, but the geographies that we've really been inhabiting on a regional scale are different and shifting. And our economies are regional in nature, but increasingly people have been traveling long distances. Now, right now we're not traveling long distances, but we know that the footprint of our economies, the goods that are coming into our regions are coming from all across many places. And certainly as we start to move around more, we will see that happen. We also very much recognize that California in its scale has been the 5th largest economy in the world, but is much more a series of distinct and diverse regional economies. And understanding the dynamics of those has always been important, and it's going to be particularly critical to leverage as we come out of the current moment of what drives those regional economies. We also recognize kind of pre-COVID, California unfortunately had been a tale of two states, both within our regional economies. Many people were facing economic challenges and those numbers have gone up staggeringly higher now, but also a kind of coastal inland dynamic that we saw in many places over a number of decades. And so as we think to the future, how do we change some of the patterns that we've had economically becomes an important question. In part, this map of California of where some of the environmental burdens have been heavily concentrated in inland California. And so economic recovery must think about some of those environmental challenges as well as we rebuild to a different future. The framework in our thinking, though, around economic development is also very much asset-based. It's trying to think about and leverage those existing assets across our distinct regional economies, whether it's in agriculture and energy and higher education and the transportation logistics structure, the wood that we have in so many parts of our state, and really trying to use those in a way that builds a different economic future, but also recognizes the differential economic impacts today. What's happening in San Diego looks quite different from what's happening in Kern County, from what's happening in the northern part of the state. And those distinct regional economies, the industries that drive them, are going to shape the kind of recovery that we want to get into. And so Regions Rise Together really becomes a way of helping encourage and support a kind of economic development at that regional scale. And so when we launched it last year, it was a partnership between GO-Biz and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research in partnership with some outside organizations. And the idea, though, it's how do we do economic development in a way that's sustainable and inclusive? Sustainable in terms of thinking about the importance of the impact on the environment and how we grow, and inclusive is really a way to create a process that brings in a wide range of voices to help shape a different conversation around our economies. We brought a lot of people together and certainly can always broaden that table in conversations last year. Now, these types of in-person meetings we're not having right at this moment, but we are starting to see a lot of virtual conversations at the regional scale as groups come together to really think about how they shape their economy going to the future. And as we did this work over the last year, we really thought about this question: California Dream must work for everybody or it works for nobody. A lot of this framing was part of it. And I will say that the commitment to those principles that embedded into Regions Rise Together stays just as strongly today. That is absolutely the direction, and to really think about things from a regional basis. And so the Regions Rise Together can become a frame and a lens for looking at the economy and for looking at a way to engage with it. And so these three ideas of changing our mental map, really tailoring our activities to be regions up, and then thinking about the linkages between our regions as part of that. And the idea of a mental map, we all have it, we inhabit it in our communities, we look at the surrounding geographies, but changing that view of the state and seeing opportunity in places we hadn't seen it before. This is a map overlaid on top of the original California Santa Fe Railroad network of looking at the high-speed rail investments, which are really about linking communities, linking economies, but seeing opportunity in different places. The Regions Up economic development planning work, we are working with partners throughout the state who are really doing a lot of this great work, and some of them are on the phone, but you're seeing groups come together across regional economies and say, how do we think about the kinds of strategies that are going to tailor a different kind of economic recovery, a different kind of economic future? And the kind of third piece of this really is around the connective tissue. Broadband is such a critical component of our economies now. Rail, water, these types of investments really link our regions to each other and make us collectively part of California. So in closing, what I really wanted to kind of point out is how do we then take this Regions Rise Together, this statewide framework that we've launched, and apply it towards what we're calling kind of high road recovery, a comprehensive high road recovery. Well, the first is sort of the idea of a just transition. Let's think about how do we diversify our economies moving forward. Economies are always in transition, but looking really for the opportunities to build on the great firms in our regional economies that are providing quality jobs. We want to bounce forward in a different way. It's going to be difficult times ahead, but we know that we can build on the great economic activities that are in each of our regions, and let's support the employers and the job quality that's truly going to embed a different future for people. The second is as we come together, we have to really build an inclusive process, and that sometimes requires creating new partnerships across business, labor, community, government to do the kind of long-term economic development planning. And we're starting to see this happen in each of our places. And those of you in local government and economic development groups and community foundations and labor, CBOs are all part of that conversation. And then lastly, we can't just think about things in a silo. It's not just jobs over here or economic development there or housing development on one side. It's really an integrated approach where we think about an economic recovery that looks at how we grow, where we grow, how we get around, preparing ourselves for climate disruptions, being climate resilient, but also thinking about the social infrastructure as well. And how do we use this and think about the existing planning processes, a lot of them investing in infrastructure like a regional transportation plan, and have our economic development much more aligned with that. So that in many ways is the sort of spirit of Regions Rise Together, thinking about the distinct regional economies of California and really what drives them today and what's going to drive them in the future, but really wanted to end with that point about inclusion as a process that brings voices to the table, distinct voices to the table. So we're going to hear from some great folks today working on that. I want to pass it back to my colleague Trey at GO-Biz to go to the next step. Thank you all for being part of this today.
Thank you, Egon. Hi, everyone. My name is Trey Bradley, and I am a Senior Business Development Specialist here in the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And today I will be going over our agenda and a few notes for the webinar. We are incredibly grateful to all of our presenters today for taking their time and sharing their information and resources. First, we will go over a few quick updates and info from GO-Biz, followed by Tanua at LISC LA, Steve at the Sierra Business Council, and Kieran at the Strategic Growth Council. And working with just what Egon had kind of led into and thinking about our past weekly webinar series, we're really looking to kind of drive the conversation in this webinar based on, sharing with many of our federal partners in the past. And of course, the different funding opportunities that are coming out given COVID-19. We ask that if you have any questions, please type them in the chat so then we can respond with the correct answer or connect you with the agency or person for directing your question to. When we do post the recording on YouTube, there will be a link provided at the bottom of the video for input of questions. Use the link provided to then enter a ticket system within that YouTube recording. This system will allow you to be paired directly with a GO-Biz staff so that we can then work to connect with the proper contact or presenter to answer your question. All webinar recordings on YouTube will contain a link to Zendesk in the box below the video. We also will aggregate these questions and responses and be provided within documents and follow-up. Following each live webinar, including this one, you'll be directed to a survey. The survey is intended to get your feedback on both the content of the day as well as the activities of our offices broadly. We please ask that you do fill it out. If you are unable after this time, we encourage you to do so later. In every recording, we will include the survey in the bottom alongside the question intake system. We want to hear from you. All recordings of the webinars will be posted on the website and YouTube channel. We will share these links widely for viewing and aim to work with our partners to disseminate the recording. Make sure to check out our last 2 weekly webinars on YouTube. Webinar 1 on navigating federal funding opportunities with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, Housing and Urban Development Team, and Grants Republic. And weekly webinar number 2, California Federal Partners for COVID-19 with OPR, Strategic Growth Council, GO-Biz, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Small Business Administration, Export-Import Bank, Economic Development Administration, Environmental Protection Agency, and Housing and Urban Development. We also have since posted 2 program impact videos. These videos are shorter micro-learning videos built to offer a deeper dive into a funding opportunity or resource given COVID-19. Number 1 is on the Paycheck Protection Program with the Small Business Administration, and number 2 is on the Community Development Block Grant Program with Housing and Urban Development. Our latest program impact video dives into the Community Development Block Grant Program and the eligible activities to support economic development, businesses, and COVID-19 response and recovery. It includes an update on the $1 billion to be distributed via CDBG on May 11th, and additional $2 billion at discretion of the Secretary or a TBD formula. We want to thank the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Office of Field Policy and Management team for creating this video to share critical information given this time. Check out the short video on our YouTube. For GO-Biz, we would like to share our COVID-19 resource page at business.ca.gov/coronavirus-2019. This is a living page that we update, including our webinars, videos, and technical assistance and finance resources to be able to share. At the top in the bold, you'll note the sentence, subscribe to the GO-Biz newsletter to receive updates. We share all updates made to the page via our newsletter outlet during COVID-19. Lastly, we encourage staying connected. Our offices have Twitters, YouTube channels, and subscription lists for respective newsletters and information. We're also posting all information online in publicly accessible places to ensure that the information is readily and easily available. If you or your agency or department are having any issues accessing any of the information or using any of the links, we ask that you please reach out to us and let us know right away. With that, I would like to turn it over to our first presenter to follow up on an inclusive approach to recovery during COVID-19, Tanua at LISC, Los Angeles.
Great, thank you so much for having me on. Happy to be part of the GO-Biz conversation for today. And I'll start sharing my screen to begin my presentation. I'm Tanua Thrash, and I am the Executive Director for LISC Los Angeles. It's actually the Local Initiative Support Corporation. I just noticed that we had the term coalition in the previous slide. For today, I'm going to walk through our toolkit that we have published on our website and made available to local cities in Southern California, specifically in LA and Orange counties. And then I'll talk about some of the resources that are out there to support economic development, departments, and advocates as we look to making sure that we are creating an inclusive economy in our local communities as we reopen for post-COVID. So this toolkit is on our website, and I'll walk through it. For those of you who don't know who LISC is, we work in partnership with residents and partners, and we forge resilient and inclusive communities of opportunity across America. We focus on making sure we create great places to live, work, visit, do business, and raise a family. Just to give you some idea about our impact, just in LA County, we've got 35 offices across the country, 4 in the state of California, Bay Area, rural California, Los Angeles, and San Diego. In Los Angeles alone, we helped to deploy $31 million in lending dollars to support affordable housing, almost $2 million in economic development and small business lending, and we also deploy grants that we receive both from the federal government and other entities, as well as philanthropy in the private sector, at about almost $900,000. Last year, we brought on 412 new units of affordable housing and assisted 270 individuals through a series of trainings and workshops that we offer. Let's get into the toolkit itself. I'll just quickly walk through the 7 areas. And when you go to our website and you take a look at the toolkit, you'll see an introductory letter from me where I talk about the importance of making sure that we're connecting with those businesses that we typically don't get a chance to connect with. So first, in the toolkit, number 1, we talk about deferral of payments. This is all based on research that we've done with cities across the country and certainly in the state. You'll see in the toolkit as well on our website a series of case studies and best practices of what cities are doing to really support small businesses. So to the extent that you've got, fees that you are charging businesses, other outstanding taxes, you even might have an outstanding loan portfolio program. We're encouraging you to put those on a forbearance and restructuring them in a way to support small businesses during this time. The second area in that toolkit is really all about business assistance. So being able to provide technical assistance and support. One of the things that I'm going to share a little bit later is a business guide that we've put together specifically for businesses on main streets and ethnic corridors. And what we did there is also put together an appendix that really goes over who are some of the technical assistance providers that provide support in language, as well as at the scale and level that businesses need. We also suggest that you identify firms that can reposition their activities and what they're currently doing and help businesses figure out how do they pivot so that they can respond to either the pandemic supply needs or the changing needs and what customers are going to be needing given the pandemic crisis. The third area that we've identified is really all about investing low-cost capital. Several cities that we've seen across Southern California and the West Coast have really been trying to figure out how do they deploy grant funds, and in some cases that might mean low-cost loans, 0% interest or very, very, very low interest loans, especially for those businesses who either haven't been able to qualify or need additional support in order to qualify for federal products. We've seen some cities reposition EDA funds that they might have, Economic Development Administration revolving loan funds. Others have used their general operating funds or CDBG block grant funds in order to support the funding of these kinds of activities. Number 4 is really all about forming public and private partnerships to set up pools of capital to really help small businesses in your community. So we put together sort of 3 concepts. You can set up loan pools and or grant pools with private firms. LISC, for example, nationally has a partnership with Verizon and Sam's Club and US Bank. And as part of that pool of funds, we are providing grants upwards of $10,000 to small businesses throughout the country. And that's something that can be done locally, which we're doing in Los Angeles, for example, with Wells Fargo. You can serve as a guarantor. We know that the state of California has its state guarantee program, and while that goes up to 95% loan to value, there's still a need to cover potentially anywhere from 5 to 15% of that particular kind of loan. So you can leverage your dollars and make them go a little further that way. And of course, you can continue to raise dollars from philanthropy so that you can provide grant support to local small businesses, particularly those that have brick and mortar, for example, have less than 5 employees, just really try and reach those neighborhoods that need it most. Number 5, for those cities that are able to do this, consider instating a moratorium on evictions for commercial business owners as well. This way, hopefully, we can start a conversation between businesses that are really struggling to be able to pay their rent, as well as their landlords, and to try and keep our commercial corridors filled in the long run, so that we can support our commercial corridors and tax base. One of the things that we're starting to see pop up is there any way that counties, for example, could consider some property tax relief for owners who are able to forgive and or work with a local small business in managing their rent in such a way that it is both something that the landlord as well as the commercial tenant can manage. So looking at ways that cities can come in to encourage that conversation. Number 6 is all about a call for data. You might ask, well, what does that mean? Yesterday, we held a dynamic webinar series on this, and it's really all about establishing a direct line of communication and contact with the businesses in your community. We had, for example, the city of Oakland on our webinar, and they talked about the fact that they put this survey out and hundreds and thousands of businesses responded to that survey. And what they were able to find out was what was most important to businesses, what did they need now, how were they faring during the pandemic, but most importantly, what it told them as well was who was not responding. And they were finding large swaths of demographics of business owners in their city that were not responding to this call for data. And that led them to understand that there were still continued to be some language barriers, although they had offered the survey in various languages, and that there was a different kind of outreach that needed to be done for various parts of the city. So they were able to redirect resources to parts of the city where they could tell that information was not getting and more support was needed. We believe that this kind of call for data will arm local governments with a robust sort of data that will help them in leveraging external reports, philanthropic requests, and really just internal planning as well. And then finally, our Initiate a Buy Local campaign. We really can't underestimate the importance of really ensuring that your local business improvement district, your local chambers of commerce, and others have all of the resources that they need in order to be able to help businesses collectively connect with customers in a whole new way. One of the things that we heard about recently on a call, another webinar that we hosted, is that there was a city's Chamber of Commerce that was going to be hosting a sidewalk sale for Mother's Day. And as part of that, the Chamber had gone out and identified a series of businesses with the kinds of products that could be easily displayed online and could be purchased by local residents, and from there could be delivered to their homes. So it's a great way to really invest in the local infrastructure to make sure that our chambers and business improvement districts have what they need to connect with customers. We also want to remind cities, and one of the things that we're hearing from local residents is that it's important that the cities help businesses share the information that they are wearing the personal protective equipment, for example, in food preparation, and that they're taking measures to keep everyone safe, and that it's okay to continue to make purchases because there is integrity in what they're purchasing. One of the programs that we started in order to reach those businesses that are just hardest to reach for a variety of reasons is keeping our shops on the block. We're happy to share this on our website, and you can take a look at some of the things that we've done there. In particular, we offer a toolkit that you can make available to small businesses wherever you are that really is a step-by-step. You don't just read it. In order to use this small business resource guide, you actually have to click on it, and there's all kinds of step-by-steps to help businesses understand how to pivot during COVID-19, how to market during COVID-19, and really, giving them all kinds of other grant resources and support. And then I'll bring to your attention an interesting and another opportunity to be able to connect with small businesses who maybe, haven't had traditional relationships with banking institutions and are looking for other ways to be able to raise capital. So through LISC's Kiva program, it's a crowdfunding platform. Kiva it's an international platform that has millions of lenders, which are everyday people like you and I across the country and across the world who are lending on this platform. For a mere $25, you could be a lender on this program. The unique relationship with LISC is that this is a 0% interest, 0% fee loan, and during the COVID-19 crisis, loans can be upwards of $15,000 for small businesses. We've worked with other cities in LA County, for example, and are talking with cities in Orange County, where we've set up a local city as a hub to be a resource of being able to provide this Kiva program. If a business is approved through the Kiva platform to raise, let's say, $10,000 in a loan, as long as they're able to raise that $5,000 through the Kiva borrower or through the Kiva platform, again, with lenders of everyday people like you and I contributing at least $25,000 minimum. As a lender, LISC will match that dollar for dollar and also at 0% interest, 0% fee to accelerate helping that business owner get access to a $10,000 loan. So with that, I will stop there, but those are just some of the resources that we have made available. I'd encourage you to take a look at the LISC Los Angeles website. There you'll find the toolkit itself for local governments on how you might respond and some strategies and ideas on responding to the COVID-19 crisis for small businesses. You'll find our Keeping Our Shops on the Block initiative along with the interactive guide for small businesses. And you'll find a list of grants that are available for the most part nationally for small businesses in your community. And if you've got any questions, there's our contact information herein, and I will turn it back over to Trey. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next we have Steve Frisch, who is at the Sierra Business Council.
On what's going on in the Sierra Nevada region, and really appreciate hearing about all the great work that Tanua and her team are doing. I want to make sure that you guys are seeing my screen.
Yeah, you are. So press the present button there you got on the left-hand side. Next one, to the right. There you go.
Great. So the Sierra Business Council is a regional triple bottom line sustainable economic development organization based in Truckee, but serving roughly a 20-county region in the Sierra Nevada. We work on business innovation, climate adaptation, renewable energy, and building social capital and capacity in the Sierra Nevada region. And we are also the Small Business Development Center for Northeastern California. And as you might guess, things have been quite busy in the last 2 months in face of the COVID-19 crisis. So we've really focused a lot of our attention around this issue of building resources to recover, adapt, and improve our economy in the region. We recognize that there's a lot of kind of adaptation work that needs to be done around the local business community right now. But this is also an opportunity to look forward to reframing our economy and beginning to look at a more integrated approach to regional economic development through that Regions Rise Together framework. Our Small Business Development Center tracks metrics through the years, and from 2018 to 2019, we've increased services dramatically. You can see some metrics here on the number of clients served, bringing $20 million in new capital to the region, starting 28 new businesses, and supporting roughly 1,300 or 1,200 new jobs created within the region in the last year. But all of that changed about 2 months ago, where we began to focus on how this crisis was beginning to drive a new need for economic diversification within our region. So we've been increasingly focusing on workforce development and training a new workforce for changes in the business community, looking at how we can support business startups across the region and businesses that are making that really dramatic pivot in the region. What new infrastructure investments we need to support changes in business, how we can take an economic gardening approach to gradually building small businesses to address larger markets, building local investment and capital funds, and that's one of the major focuses of my presentation today. And then as a region heavily dependent upon natural resources, how we can integrate resource restoration into an economic development strategy for the Sierra Nevada region. So in the last 2 months, we've dramatically scaled our response to meet the scale of the crisis. We've worked with we've done a series of toolkits, rapid response webinars. We had information up helping our small businesses within roughly 5 days of the shelter order being put in place. We've increased staff resources by about 400%, focusing on direct technical assistance to businesses within the region. Took in about 700 new clients in a 30-day period after the shelter-in-place order was put in place. Worked with numerous cities and counties in the region to create response committees around the issues that were emerging from COVID-19. Did a series of rapid business surveys by business sector within the Sierra Nevada to identify what issues they were addressing and really how they needed to start thinking about reopening or restructuring their businesses in face of the new conditions. We provided direct technical assistance for those clients to access to EIDL, or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and the Paycheck Protection Program loans. And then we targeted outreach specifically to community banks within the region in order to help them scale capacity to accept SBA funding and process loans. And as a result, I think, of that direct technical assistance matching community banks to businesses, we so far have had a 23% hit rate on our SBA loans that we've worked on within the region. We've also worked to staff 2 community response funds in different regions of the Sierra Nevada, and then created a community resilience fund to provide micro loans to businesses within the Sierra Nevada region, focused specifically on the types of businesses that were likely to slip through the cracks in the SBA process. One of the things that we noticed in the SBA process is that smaller businesses, businesses with historic kind of disadvantage in accessing loan programs, businesses that were unbanked, businesses that didn't have the capacity to actually work on these loan programs, were likely to face a capital shortfall and have a difficulty accessing SBA loans. So we specifically created our resilience fund to address essentially the businesses that would be likely to fall through the cracks. The purpose of the fund is to work with individual businesses to do coaching in order to help them make that pivot that we've been talking about today. So this is individual one-on-one coaching on everything from business and financial planning to changing markets, to the types of retrofits and operational changes that they're going to need to make in the face of COVID. And then we provide those businesses with microloans at 0% interest for 12 to 18 months at the beginning term of the loan, which could then go up to 1 to 2% in the remaining term of the loan, and provide working capital to local businesses owners when operations have been suspended to try to bring them back online. And then finally, the source of the fund is really invested local community resources, similar to what Tanua was talking about, with a combination of charitable giving, funds from local government sources, and then also investors in the fund. So this is an SEC licensed micro enterprise fund. So if someone chooses to invest in the fund, they can actually invest money in the fund for a 5-year period at a 2% rate of return. Our goal is to raise $5 million in capital to reopen roughly 300 businesses in a portion of our region. We've intaken 120 clients to date. We've done 5 loans to date. Considering the point we started standing this up 3 weeks ago, I think the point that we built it in 3 weeks has been quite a process. And we issued our first loans that led to a business reopening a week ago. So the process really is that a business applies for a loan, the application is vetted, they're directed to a bank or to a government program first. We provide technical assistance to help them receive that other funding if it is available. If it's not available, or if supplemental funding is needed, then we provide a loan from the Resilience Fund. And unfortunately, one of the things that we're seeing is that for some businesses, debt just doesn't make sense at this point. And for some of them, they may decide that they're not going to proceed with accessing additional funding, just because they don't have a business model that is going to continue to work. Once we've identified all of those things, we underwrite and disperse the loan. And then throughout the life of the loan, the business receives free technical assistance until that loan is paid in full. But what this has really led to is to this discussion of what the framework for regional economic development moving forward is likely to look like. And we have been working with numerous jurisdictions around what would a Regions Rise Together initiative in the Sierra Nevada look like, and what sorts of things would have to be taken on in that integrated approach to recovery and regional economic development. And we've been working with them to identify what are the key sectors that they would need to look at, including an economic development strategy, a natural resource restoration strategy, a housing and housing access strategy, a health and community wellness strategy, a community strategy that includes a strong focus on equity, smart growth, and building capacity within the region. And then finally, an infrastructure strategy that looks at things like green infrastructure, renewable energy, transportation, communications. And through this process, we've found that there are some very serious gaps in our existing systems that I think are rural gaps that are really kind of, I would say, not just unique to rural regions, but are emphasized in rural regions. One of them is access to capital for small businesses within the region, which the Resilience Fund is intended to try to address. The second one is really this issue of access to high-speed communications. One of the systems that we've seen heavily stressed is broadband and broadband networks that has led to many students not being able to access distance learning and difficulty providing distance healthcare or telemedicine and healthcare services within the region. Definitely an emphasis on rural healthcare and strengthening the healthcare systems within rural regions. A clear need for new workforce education and training programs around things like resource restoration and some of the issues we see emerging in the region around the link between climate adaptation and new economic opportunities. And then finally, an overall need in the region for an emphasis in the future on economic diversification, so that when similar events happen, whether they be wildfire or atmospheric river or public safety power shutoffs or whatever they are, that the economy is more resilient and able to bounce back from a shock like this recent COVID crisis. So that's really the work that we're beginning to do now, is to focus on what is the regional recovery strategy for the Sierra Nevada region and the subregions of the Sierra. With that, thank you so much for this opportunity to provide the information, and I'd like to hand it over to Karen at the Strategic Growth Council.
Hey everybody, thanks so much. The work you're doing with that fund and kind of just across your organization is amazing. It looks like everybody can hear me now. Hi everybody, my name is Kieran Kumar and I am the Community Assistance for Climate Equity Program Manager at the California Strategic Growth Council, or SGC as people refer to us. Our program team is inclusive of all of SGC's technical assistance and capacity building efforts to help under-resourced communities equitably develop projects, compete for, and ultimately implement climate solutions. The beauty of this work, though, is that the investments that we make in community assistance are not just helping local government, business, and community groups build capacity around climate change, but instead we're helping communities develop and access the relationships, collaboration, technical resources, and leadership to respond to and be resilient to all kinds of disruptive change. And then, of course, relevant to this conversation, that kind of technical assistance and capacity building it translates well to successfully pursuing federal funding as well. In the nearest term, this work, of course, means helping communities start responding to and then, of course, recovering from the impacts of COVID-19. And so while many of the panelists have talked about resources available now and the work that they're doing to support effective public engagement and recovery efforts, I'll spend some time touching on some of the work that the state is doing, and specifically Strategic Growth Council, to develop funding programs to support and sustain community resilience work well into the future. So the Strategic Growth Council, just for some background, is a cabinet-level state organization that coordinates and works collaboratively across state government and with public agencies, communities, and stakeholders to achieve equity and quality of life for all Californians. We're pretty well known for our funding programs that invest cap and trade revenues in communities to catalyze equitable climate, health, and economic development outcomes. But we also play a convening role within communities. So a lot of the work that Egon was talking about earlier, as well as across state governments on topics like housing and transportation, health equity, and resource conservation. Central to the SGC mission is advancing equity, recognizing that California's most disadvantaged communities often face the greatest impacts of climate and historic inequities. So while our focus and charge is reducing greenhouse gas emissions across sectors, we also recognize that in order to do so effectively and on a sustainable basis, impacted communities have to be at the center of those decision-making processes. So at SGC, we staff 4 primary grant programs, 2 capacity building and technical assistance programs, and 2 integrated policy programs. Most of these programs are in partnership with other state agencies and sometimes statewide nonprofit organizations. A large part of my work is thinking through how these programs develop and implement effective technical assistance to ensure that under-resourced communities can actually compete for these funds and implement community-led initiatives. SGC's Race Equity Action Plan, or REAP, formalizes the agency's commitment to equity and was developed through participation in what's called the Government Alliance on Race Equity, which was actually convened by the Strategic Growth Council's Health and All Policies team. When we talk about equity in our programs, we're both referencing the who and the how. So in terms of who, we're of course wanting to make sure that the funding reaches California's most disadvantaged communities and impacted populations. But we're also concerned about the how. Increasingly through our funding guidelines, we prioritize projects that are demonstrably community driven, ones that originated from and continue to be supported by community groups and under-resourced populations. For example, in our Transformative Climate Communities program, or TCC, we not only prioritize projects that are community driven, but require a collaborative stakeholder structure for implementation, where residents play a role in shaping the program. Some of the programs fund elements of workforce development and anti-displacement as well, and we've moved to now have a tribal set aside in our Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. Despite our commitment to equity and funding community-led projects, we also recognize that not all communities have a rich density of community-based organizations or necessarily the staff capacity to invest in really robust community engagement and partnership that's often necessary for state and federal funding. We also recognize that state funding programs can be extremely challenging for under-resourced communities to apply for, especially when communities need to do additional planning or update policy guidance. This is where the work of my team comes in, with free technical assistance on a number of grant programs to support communities effectively applying for and then implementing those projects. The primary goal of the California Climate Investments Technical Assistance, or simply CCITA program, is to support communities in applying for CCI programs or projects. While this can seem pretty specific to climate projects and climate funding, much of the technical assistance offered around partnership building, community engagement, visioning, and project development help communities apply to different funding sources, build collaboration that informs other efforts, and develop project pipelines. Three primary goals of our existing technical assistance programs: of course, direct assistance during the application phase, capacity building, which we're building more kind of staff infrastructure and program around, and then of course integrating CCI programs, so making sure that our funding is not necessarily siloed, but helping communities actually leverage different sources of funding, and then also think about ways to go after philanthropy dollars as well as federal funding to address local issues. So this is a description or a table of some of the TA activities that are in progress this year or have been completed in the past year. Each of the CCI investments programs has its own set of goals and intended outcomes, meaning specific technical experts are often needed for these projects and technical assistance. So in many cases, TA is provided through partnerships between state agencies and outside organizations with that expertise in each of the program's focus. In order to provide the assistance that is tailored to each program, we work closely with program staff and stakeholders to design TA activities that meet their needs. And then on top of that, we are now underway developing what are called technical assistance guidelines, where we're collecting best practices, not just across state agencies, but also local organizations and entities that provide technical assistance to capture best practices and inform state practice moving forward. And then so moving into some of the capacity building work, after more than 5 years of providing mostly application-based technical assistance for a number of climate change investment programs, and then gathering insights from our efforts like the Transformative Climate Communities program, it's become clear to us and our stakeholders that further upstream investment is necessary in a lot of under-resourced communities in order for them to effectively compete for funding. As a result, SGCs begin to develop programs and initiatives that provide more foundational capacity building services to communities to help identify needs and opportunities, match initiatives with funding opportunities, do robust public engagement, and then of course educate partners about programs and funding sources that they can leverage. And then even more than our program-specific technical assistance efforts, we're envisioning that these capacity building programs are establishing sustainable networks of partners, new skills, and access to technical resources that not only lead to more effective state grant applications, but are helping communities respond to disruptive change like what we're seeing now. So this is a bit of our kind of theory of change with this capacity building work. Though most of our historic work in TA has been in the project development and implementation or specific project assistant phases, we're really hoping to kind of move some of our investment in technical assistance capacity building into the upstream capacity building section, where we're focusing on education and awareness raising, skill building, and partnership development. I'll just touch on a couple of programs we've either built or are working on building. Through its Beacon program, the Institute for Local Government will work with, and is currently working with 10 local governments in 2 regions to build local capacity by strengthening local coordination, leadership, expertise, and access to resource, with the ultimate goal, again, of developing competitive funding proposals. While the focus is climate related, given the funding source, we're finding that many of the communities are actively wanting to work on related but more pressing issues like homelessness, economic development, and then now more than ever, COVID response. Given the impact that COVID is having on many of these communities, we think that a capacity building and technical assistance program like this that is flexible is well suited to provide direct tailored TA. And then also just a note that having the Boost program in place is also creating a really rich feedback loop between the state and many of these communities. Where having dedicated staff working with these communities enables for learning about needs and opportunities to further support with either subsequent rounds of technical assistance or amending our existing TA programs. While the Boost program is a pilot, we're hoping to continue building on the lessons learned from the program and develop further capacity building programs and grants. So the Partners Advancing Climate Equity pilot is a new capacity building program at the Strategic Growth Council that we're hoping to get off the ground pretty soon, likely mid-summer. The program is a 2-year multi-phased effort that invests in local community leaders across some of California's most under-resourced and disadvantaged communities. The focus is to build skills, knowledge, and networks towards implementing and advancing local priorities while also addressing state climate and equity goals. The program, like nearly all of our TA and capacity building programs, will equip the cohort of folks, including local government staff, community-based organizations, local business entities, and other community institutions with transferable skills around coalition building, grant writing, policy development, and public engagement that we hope that they would then be able to take back into their own communities, and 1, disseminate, and then 2, use to actually move local initiatives forward and ultimately secure funding. The premise of the program really comes from an understanding that in smaller and more disadvantaged communities, it's often a local champion or community-based leader who is most effective in bringing issues and bridging issues and building together, bringing together partners in an effective way. The program seeks to further support those individuals, whether or not they're actively engaged in climate or not, again, recognizing the current economic situations that many of our local jurisdictions find themselves in. The second phase of the program will offer technical assistance to help implement specific projects of the cohort that they identify needing further assistance on. We envision, given that the timeline, many of these projects will involve responding to the impacts of COVID-19 with policy, public partnership, and grant-seeking support. And then just to mention that we're calling it a pilot because we're hoping that it's going to inform our efforts to further develop programs, specifically grant programs that invest in this kind of tailored technical assistance over a longer period of time. And then finally, SB 1072, which was passed in 2018, directs the Strategic Growth Council to create a regional climate collaboratives grant program that will provide community capacity. So while no funding has yet been allocated to implement the program, SGC staff are engaging with partners to develop a deeper sense of how the state could best provide the knowledge, skills, and resources to identify and access public funding projects in under-resourced communities. Somewhat like the Partners Advancing Climate Equity pilot program, the RCC program, or Regional Climate Collaboratives program, would be a grant that invests in coalitions of partners to support community engagement and visioning efforts, inform policy, and provide local technical assistance. We really envision the RCC program to be a critical need in under-resourced communities and regions in being able to respond to the impacts of COVID while centering effective public engagement and climate-smart solutions. So these are just a handful of the eligible activities that we've been talking about with stakeholders about the RCCs themselves. While we're actively pursuing avenues to fund the grant program, we know that these forms of assistance are crucial for accessing public funds. So we're actively looking at our TA programs to see how we can best be responsive now with those programs in place given the additional challenges that communities will face in responding to COVID. So I hope this quick presentation helped provide you with a kind of deeper and clearer understanding of SGC's technical assistance and capacity building work that's specifically tailored to supporting under-resourced communities in successfully bringing in public funding to address local issues. While most of our existing TA programs are indeed geared towards specific climate-related programs, we're looking for ways to make those TA efforts a lot more responsive to the needs of communities now in terms of responding to and eventually recovering from COVID. And then, of course, we're excited about our new capacity building work that looks further upstream in communities to help build local leadership skills and partnerships necessary to take action both on climate as well as other local challenges. And then, of course, we see that kind of capacity building work being incredibly relevant to not just accessing state funding, but also looking at federal funding and other sources of funding to help move forward local initiatives. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Trey to what sounds like close us out.
Thank you, Karen. So with that, we want to just say that thank you to all our presenters. In closing, we want to note that if you do have any questions, to please use Zendesk ticket system provided in the link below the recording of the video. And following the closing of this webinar, a survey will also emerge to provide feedback and input based on the content of this webinar and future content. And finally, we encourage you to share the recording, stay connected, and promote any new idea or thing learned to communities, businesses, and your partners. And we are coming up to the hour, so we do want to encourage you to tune in to the governor's update today at 12 o'clock. Information sharing across the board is really critical in this time given COVID-19. So thank you for joining us for our third weekly webinar, An Inclusive Approach to Recovery during COVID-19.